started to really dig into how, what kind of new systems can be built, especially for cooperation on chain, to enable different groups of people who don't know each other to be able to scale an ecosystem, right? Because I think that's one of the most amazing things about Ethereum is for a very long time, it was lots of different people around the world working together it still is, to scale this ecosystem. And there's a huge amount of challenges within this. And I think, from my perspective, Optimism has always been doing a really excellent job at, building out their community, scaling Ethereum. And their approach has very much been focused on public goods funding. And so Mode is trying to build new systems that are much more focused on, an economic policy that's maybe slightly different. It's, we don't look at retroactive funding. We look at like ongoing funding models. Optimism ecosystem is extremely culturally rich because they have this approach to, fund creators and fund a lot of public goods that others might not do. So the way we fit in like the Superchain, which is this group of chains, is we're trying to very much push like, experiments around economic activity within DeFi ecosystem and how that can be rewarded effectively.
Yo, grab your headphones, get ready to roll. ZeroPod coming at you, taking control. We talking about nouns, NFTs, and Web3. Doing it big, bringing the knowledge for free.
Welcome back to another episode of ZeroPod, a CC0 video podcast about enjoying Ethereum, enjoying nouns, and living on-chain life. I'm Toady Hawk from the Noun Square On-Chain Media Collective, and I'm excited to welcome our guest this week, James Ross from .network, a modular DeFi L2 built on the Superchain. James, so glad to have you here. Welcome to ZeroPod.
Thanks for having me on. Super excited to chat and tell you more about Mode and what we have coming up.
Sounds good. Well, one thing we like to do on this podcast in particular is dive in first a little bit onto the person before the project. Love to hear who's behind all the building that's going on the Superchain. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your story, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us. How did you get from point A to point B to where you're now working on building this modular L2 on the Superchain?
Yeah, for sure. So I started my career working in finance and spent around 5 years working with different fintech on different fintech ideas, different kind of fintech projects, startups. Then in 2017, 18, I started getting pretty interested in crypto, especially in Ethereum, and was pretty active using a lot of early like financial applications building on Ethereum. So things like 0x, synthetics, they all launched around like between 2017, 2019. It was a really cool period of time. DeFi was like becoming or starting to become a thing. And I was trying to be an LP, trying to like be really active across these protocols. I was investing in lots of different stuff as well as an angel.
They didn't call it DeFi summer for nothing, I guess.
Exactly. And then DeFi summer came around and there was kind of this explosion of new applications in the space, new primitives, and I got really hooked. I was actively helping a lot of different DeFi protocols with their growth, their go-to-market. I was also running different DeFi strategies myself and building different market making bots and things like this. I worked for 2 years. I was running a company called Hype. It was or still is like the largest go-to-market group of company services in the space. And when I was there, I was lucky enough to work with a lot of the biggest projects. So we work with projects like BNB Chain, Near, Algorand, Definity. Last year we worked with EigenLayer, Athena, a load of others. And I got like a really kind of good insight into the things that projects need to do to be able to grow and scale. the community, and the things that many projects do, big projects especially, that don't go so well, and started to really dig into how, what kind of new systems can be built, especially for cooperation on chain, to enable different groups of people who don't know each other to be able to scale an ecosystem, right? Because I think that's one of the most amazing things about Ethereum is for a very long time, it was lots of different people around the world working together it still is, to scale this ecosystem. And there's a huge amount of challenges within this. And I think, from my perspective, Optimism has always been doing a really excellent job at, building out their community, scaling Ethereum. And their approach has very much been focused on public goods funding. And so Mode is trying to build new systems that are much more focused on, an economic policy that's maybe slightly different. It's, we don't look at retroactive funding, we look at like ongoing funding models. That's where we are.
So let's double click on that for a moment. There's a few things that you mentioned that I definitely want to dig into, but specifically the different stance on funding. What does ongoing funding mean to you, and how does that differ from retroactive funding? If you can explain that a bit.
Yeah, so I think when we look at like different funding models, there needs to be a variety within ecosystems to grow, right? I think retro it's now been renamed retro funding. So I'm pretty happy about that with Optimism. So the Optimism has retro funding. Essentially, that is when people contribute on chain, and then they apply 3 months, 6 months later for part of a funding pool, which is distributed via a governance process.
And it's based on impact that's already been made.
Exactly. And then, governance or badge holders vote for projects based on impact. That's already been given to the protocol. I think there's a lot of good in this, but there's also, different approaches that should be taken. So with Mode, we look at like contribution to the economic model of the chain. So often that involves capital. It might involve liquidity. It can involve a variety of things, but essentially we distribute incentives via models which are which grow the chain. So if you bring capital, if you do economic activity on chain, if you bring other users or new users to the chain who do economic activity, you'll get a proportion of rewards or incentives based on what you do. So,
and in what way is it different than retro, in the sense, like, is it ongoing funding, meaning it's automatic in some ways? Is that the main differentiator?
Yeah, exactly. It's automatic, it's ongoing. And I guess with retro funding, it's quite difficult to know or on day one what you might get on day 100.
Right. And to plan for that.
Exactly. And to plan effectively for that, right? Like with open source, like there's a lot of, or building open source projects involve resources. And it's very hard to plan how much, resource you should put into a certain project if you're not sure what the return will be in 3-6 months.
Well, with the last round of retro PGF from Optimism, I remember there was a little bit of controversy. There always is, of course, with any funding round. But one item of conversation I remember was the founder of Aerodrome. He was mentioning that there needs to be, for example, more focus from the badge holders on who's actually creating sequencer fees. Otherwise, Aerodrome and these other projects are going to be disincentivized to continue to build on Base or continue to build, in the case of Velodrome, on Optimism. So it was interesting to see those conversations and to see Optimism over the past couple of months try to figure out how to walk that line between impact, like what we do, educational impact, which is still very important for onboarding and whatnot, and then the type of impact that literally brings ETH in a sequence of fees to be shared with the Optimism Collective and keep that flywheel spinning.
Absolutely, and it's like it's very hard to get to a point where everything is automated and on chain. There's probably always going to be some kind of governance, and our goal as Mode is, can we build systems to bring like predictability to funding, and can we get these on chain so that developers know, okay, if I bring this much capital, or if I have a protocol with this much economic activity, I'll get X amount back. That means I should, take on this project and invest double my resources now, or I should not do it at all. So, I think for DeFi, this is a challenge that can potentially be solved, right? Having like
more of your impact incentives is on chain, right? If you're a protocol.
Exactly. But for like building a chain or building an application, protocol, anything that's very culturally rich, this becomes a lot more difficult. And especially for like Optimism ecosystem is extremely culturally rich because they have this approach to fund creators and fund a lot of public goods that others might not do. So the way we fit in like the Superchain, which is this group of chains, is we're trying to very much push like experiments around economic activity within DeFi ecosystem and how that can be rewarded effectively.
Yeah, which nobody else has really done. And we've talked a lot on this podcast about how and why I think Optimism and the Superchain is winning the culture war when it comes to L2s, despite, some other great technologies out there like Arbitrum and ZK and, lots of great builders in the space. But, with Base and with everything that's been happening over the past year, just that cultural richness on the Superchain brings users, right? And users bring capital. So it's kind of like almost, you wouldn't think that it would work that way, but it does sometimes. The culture is like a precedent to the capital.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that you can't fork, right? It's impossible to fork culture. It's organic. It's a special thing. And I think Base has done a really incredible job to bring awareness, bring users, bring like a whole new type of user as well. I would say Optimism brought a lot of early adopters from Ethereum ecosystem. Now Base is, bringing users from everywhere. Some users from Coinbase, their first on-chain experience now might be on Base, right?
Well, we launched an on-chain club on Base 3 months ago that helps to support some of our initiatives, and many of our early members are Coinbase employees, or just they're all in on Base and they're doing a great job of like leaning in on that distribution. So what sort of interested me about Mode, I mean, I pay pretty close attention to the Superchain, so I did see some things about your launch and whatnot. But OP Michael, who I follow from the OP Collective, he was tweeting and casting on Farcaster a lot about it, and it sort of just piqued my interest, specifically actually because I like to stake my ETH so that I don't spend it. And I saw that Renzo launched on Mode as one of the early apps that allows people to essentially, stake their ETH on an L2 for the first time. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that was actually what brought me to check out Mode. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we look at where DeFi is moving, right? We've seen that what users are demanding is yield, and right now we have this baseline yield rate from staking ETH, which is enabled by Lido and by other protocols. And we also have restaking ETH, which is enabled by Renzo. And Renzo has, which is restaking from EigenLayer. So Renzo has a really nice solution, an integration that we've worked with them on, which enables users to stake like natively from the L2. So if you have ETH on node, you can go to the Renzo application, and within the Renzo UI, you can select mode as the network, and then you can stake your ETH on mode and receive back easy ETH on mode. And
It was really
yeah, this has
seamless.
been
I've
extremely
done it.
popular. Yeah. Yeah, it's super easy.
Technically, how does that work? I guess is at some point that ETH being bridged over to mainnet, I guess, to be staked with EigenLayer, or is EigenLayer operating on mode in some capacity? I'm assuming
Yeah,
it's
so
the
it's
former, but
yeah, it's so essentially when you stake your ETH is bridged over to mainnet. It's staked on mainnet, and then you receive the asset back on the L2. But that all happens under the hood, and you hold easy ETH on mode, which is the token.
but the key is that all that is abstracted for the user, which I think is the theme. Seems to be the theme of 2024 is abstracting all of these, cross-chain interactions that most users don't have time for or need to understand.
Yeah, exactly, and yeah, there's I mean, when we look at DeFi and we look at the last 6 months of growth, a huge amount of this has been around these new types of liquid staking and liquid restaking tokens. And there's a lot of interesting things that users can do with these too. So yeah, it's definitely the space to watch in DeFi.
Yeah, I did want to talk to you a little bit about that. I saw in your bio that you were an angel investor in EigenLayer. And I still have a request out to Sriram to come on this pod. I'd love to have him on and chat with him because I think he's brilliant. I've heard him on a few other podcasts, and I think he's a great thinker. But talk to us a little bit about EigenLayer and how did you first find out about the tech and what excited you about it, and just generally your thoughts on EigenLayer for 2024.
Yeah. So I was working with the EigenLayer team on some of their go-to-market stuff actually around this time last year when they first launched. They launched the protocol, at least the first version. And yeah, I think it's a really interesting primitive, right? The primitive of shared security is something that, is, I mean, as an L2, we get our security from Ethereum, right? Before rollups, you would maybe start a chain by running, creating your own L1, or you would look to have a Cosmos chain, which would also require validators.
Yeah, you got to get that validator set from somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. And now, creating a rollup and leveraging Ethereum security is extremely interesting. And this has kind of led to an explosion of L2s. And we're going to see, we're now seeing the idea of paying for security becoming, I guess, maybe not as popular as it was before. This EigenLayer essentially enables this stake to secure a number of different applications, rollups, AVSs. It's super powerful. I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of interesting things happen when EigenDA launches. I think that's scheduled to launch fairly soon, potentially in the next 1, 2, 3 months. I'm not exactly sure. This will enable lower fees, even lower fees on rollups. It will be like the first big AVS to launch. And we're expecting some pretty cool things. We're exploring EigenDA.
I don't want to get too far into the weeds with EigenLayer, but one question I would ask is there's been some discussion back and forth on crypto Twitter and elsewhere about rehypothecation risk and a lot of discussion about this. And some people have answered it very well, but I think some listeners to the podcast might still worry about it if they've seen that place. Like, oh, is this like is this like doubling down? Is this like the entire Ethereum ecosystem leveraging up and getting themselves into trouble? Can you explain why this isn't that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think like it's important to discuss like the risks. that exist within these systems. And when you stake ETH with a validator, you rely on that validator to act honestly, right? Otherwise you get slashed. So there's always this like baseline trust assumption. In the same way, when you restake your ETH, the same trust assumption exists that the validator is going to behave in the correct way and is not going to get slashed. So when EigenLayer initially launches, I believe there won't be slashing, but there will be quite near in the future. So it's not something that's completely risk-free. I think we've seen over the last few months, people have, said that staked ETH or Lido is like it's a risk-free rate, but that's not the case. There's definitely some risk, albeit like it might be quite small right now.
Well, I mean, I guess a treasury bill is not really a risk-free rate either. If you get...
Yeah. So yeah, with EigenLayer, using the stake, like EigenLayer can essentially, and the restaked assets, EigenLayer can essentially leverage this across different rollups, different ecosystems, and users will pay, or rollups will pay for that security, and that will go to the people who have staked. There is a rate. Like, I think that most people expect it to be like an extra 1 to 2% on top of the baseline kind of ETH staking yield. So it's not like it's a good amount. It's not a huge amount, and there is extra risk that exists. So I think that this isn't necessarily rehypothecation. It's kind of extending the asset's reach for a higher yield, but also with a higher kind of risk profile.
Yeah, that's helpful, I think, for people. All right, so getting back to Mode, I'd love to hear a little bit about what's been going on with your launch and what you're most excited about for 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been live for about 8 weeks. We've seen a good amount of assets come. We've started to build out the foundational like DeFi ecosystem. We have some really cool lending protocols, DEXs, and they're supporting a wide variety of assets. So users can use yield-bearing assets like Easy ETH from Renzo. They can add this to an LP, a liquidity pool, and start earning fees. They can also lend it on lending protocol. So we've kind of started to build out the foundations. Now we're expanding assets. We recently integrated wrapped ETH, which is from EtherFi. And we have a load more yield-bearing assets that are going to launch. We have a couple projects we've been working on around enabling users to get different yield opportunities with different risk profiles on Mode. So they're coming out. There are going to be some games launching. We have a few L3s being built. So certainly an exciting time. It's like early days, but we're starting to see some nice growth. And we're also trying to contribute as much as we can when it comes to building out the kind of Optimism ecosystem, and working with a lot of projects that are on Optimism base on how they can like expand out their DeFi kind of strategies and capabilities as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting part of what you guys are doing. We touched on it a little bit earlier before about how each part of the Superchain has their own sort of focus. And in a way, I think that's kind of a superpower of the Superchain, which is that you don't have to be everything for everyone. Base doesn't have to be the DeFi chain and compete head to head with Arbitrum, but maybe Mode can be, the DeFi chain for the Superchain. And then, as it becomes easier and easier and more interoperable between these chains, then to the end user, it doesn't matter. And you'll be able to go from base to Mode to Optimism in one transaction without noticing the friction.
Absolutely. And I think that's really like what we're aiming for, right, as mode. So we know that like in efficient market, assets will be where there is the best risk adjusted yield. For a lot of the LRTs and LFTs, that's maybe Ethereum right now, maybe Arbitrum, maybe it's an L2 like mode. We have to kind of continue, like our job is to bring these different assets that have different yield profiles and different risk profiles to the Optimism ecosystem. And yeah, when the Superchain, when this technology, its interoperability technology launches, we're expecting that users, for example, might want to stake their ETH somewhere with a good yield and then borrow against it to, I don't know, buy NFTs or play games or test out new protocols. And our goal is for mode to be, that place for users who are looking to access different yields with different risk profiles.
Yeah, I'm really bullish on that because when I first started getting into crypto, after many years of running businesses in the meat space, it blew my mind, protocols like Aave, that you could actually put your own collateral up and nobody made a decision about how much you could borrow against that collateral or where you could put it, et cetera. It's like, wow, like the banks don't want to be, in every decision. But now I look back and I look at all the interactions on Aave back in 2021 and just like cry at the gas prices that you would pay for Aave transactions, but just pay through the nose like $200 to unlock something, whatever. So, taking that, that unlock, I guess, and then bringing it one step further onto L2s, I think is going to be huge for people because they're going to see that they have the freedom to transact with their funds however they want, and it's not going to cost them, huge percentages of their stack just to, to borrow against whatever. If you go on Ionic, which I've played around with a little bit, or if you go on Aave on one of the L2s, it's just so much easier.
Absolutely. And yeah, like people are, running much more complex strategies now. Because that's possible on L2s. And I think we're going to see, like right now we're seeing a lot of L2 focused DeFi strategies. So for example, a strategy a lot of people are doing on mode is they put their collateral into a lending protocol like Ionic, they borrow against it, they maybe put it into an LP position on Kim or another DEX. I think we're going to, continue to see, well, right now we're seeing these like L2 native DeFi strategies with yield bearing assets. So it's like points for Renzo, points for mode, points for,
everyone trying to double and triple dip.
Yeah, exactly. And I think soon we're going to start to see like, much more cross-chain, DeFi emerging. And I think that's something that the Superchain is going to lead the way on. And that's really, really exciting.
Yeah, it goes back to that interoperability that we were talking about before and really being able to move those funds across. People joke or laugh about the points meta, but I mean, it kind of goes back to what you said earlier where, DeFi and on-chain finance has this like advantage of being able to reward behavior permissionlessly. And that's kind of what, not all points, but some points and some airdrops are like that. It's like if you use 3 different protocols, maybe you will be rewarded in airdrops, who knows, from these different protocols. So that's, I think, exciting for people.
Yeah, I think that as well, like the previous meta around airdrops was very much like, use this chain, do all this, do some stuff, right? It was like, come and do some stuff, right? And you kind of had to guess. You're like, okay, I'm gonna do 5 trades over $50, or I'm gonna use these 3 protocols.
What you could do is just inverse my wallet. Whatever I did, do the opposite, and that's what would have qualified you for the airdrop.
But, it was like, and it was kind of random. And then a few protocols started to launch like points or incentives, which were very much focused on, what they needed to succeed. So it might like, yield farming, the incentives were around liquidity. And that was important because, these protocols needed liquidity to scale.
Or something like Rainbow, where they're prioritizing swaps because that's what they need to remain profitable.
Exactly. And so it started to get more and more, the points would kind of guide or incentivize people to do the behavior, the outcome that the protocol needed to succeed, which was great. And yeah, with work mode, we're trying to take that like a step further. Is that the points are really driving like the economic activity, and these incentives are pretty clear. And there's also like a scale towards them. For example, not every dollar or not every ETH on chain is equal, right? Like one ETH that just sits on a chain is not really worth much. It makes the TVL number look good, but is it worth anything? I would say it's definitely not worth as much as one ETH, which is active in a lending protocol, or one ETH, which is active within an LP position on a DEX that's supporting.
And it's also a lot more transient too, right? Because it's one one bridge transaction of going to the next L2. Whereas if it's actually active, so it makes sense to incentivize people to use it.
So it's like, we have to work out as mode, like what is every ETH worth in all these different strategies, and how can we incentivize the ones that help mode grow, and how can we kind of support users with growing the chain? Because I think this is the big problem to solve, right? Is you can quite easily probably launch something and get some hype, get some interest, but then the capital will come and the capital will go, right? It will go somewhere else. Whereas if you can really incentivize people to do the things that grow the ecosystem, they should see that if they stay, they're going to probably earn yield, and there's probably more incentives in the future, and that's all aligned. And it's a fine line with getting that all right.
Yeah. One project that's sort of done a good job of this recently, I'm not sure if you've been sort of following the Degen coin project over on Farcaster. It's kind of interesting because similar to what you've been talking about, they've sort of put all these airdrops aside to incentivize certain social behaviors to sort of intricately link their project with Farcaster and using that network and getting the desired results.
Absolutely. I was part of a few different early Farcaster groups. One of them was called The Gentleman. I wasn't too active.
I'm in that chat actually. Yeah.
but it was really cool to see. And I really think it's like an awesome project. I think it's kind of showed how powerful like microbounties can be. Mm-hmm. And I think this is something which hasn't been explored too much. Like most bounties, grants, whatever you want to call them, they're usually like quite large, right? They're like, $1,000 to do this task, or like $20,000 grant or $50,000 grant to do this project.
And they feel inaccessible to the average user in those cases.
And they're kind of tough, right? Like, it's kind of like, again, you're like weighing up, like, should I do this? What other opportunities are there? Like, this might take ages. I might never get it if I don't fulfill all the criteria. This might be super competitive. Whereas, with the early Degen community, it was like, make a cool meme. Okay, cool. You get tipped. And this had like a really awesome feedback loop because it was really fast. People turned up again the next day, checked out what was happening. So I really enjoyed watching it grow.
Yeah, it's been interesting to me because in past cycles, I've seen meme coins and shit coins more so usually as just pumps and dumps. The odd one would survive a little longer than most, but none of them really became communities for the most part. But you've seen that in this cycle where like coins like Degen or higher, or I'm sure there's others on other chains, have really become more like community coins rather than meme coins, even though they are meme coins at their core. But they've managed to I guess tie in the utility to a certain community and make that work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think the cool thing with Degen is, like you said, it had a platform for coordination, which was like new and had like a certain audience, right, of early adopters that could like communicate and coordinate around like a common goal, which was basically just doing fun, cool stuff on Farcaster for this Degen meme. So I thought that
Enjoying
was
Ethereum.
awesome. Yeah,
Enjoying
enjoying
Ethereum
Ethereum,
together.
and they're
Well,
also like, yeah, it's cool when you get smart people in one place. Um, cool things happen.
I think that's why what a lot has attracted a lot of us to Farcaster and away from the app formerly known as the Bird app. I know I spend a lot more time on Farcaster these days just because of what you just said. It's the conversation, the discourse is a lot more signal. Although sometimes it's harder to find the signal in the meme coins these days, but there's still ultimately a lot more signal and a lot more interesting people. Maybe I could ask you a question about Farcaster because it's been a huge part of sort of the narrative of this cycle so far. What as an early user of Farcaster, what have been your observations of what Dan and co have been building, and what do you think it means, for broader crypto adoption?
Yeah, I think that. So I've been like, I've been fairly active. Like I use it like most days, I would say. But I haven't had that much time to like really invest in it. But I think that, yeah, I think that like the way they launched it, where it was fairly closed for a long time, was really good because it got this like fire burning within the community, right? And you really felt like you were invested, right? When you got the invite, like from Dan, like I got one directly. I think a lot of people got like a direct invite from him. It was like, oh wow, I've got to try this out. And I think that's one of the hardest hurdles for any new application, especially social apps. It's getting through that bootstrapping phase. And I think they did like an incredibly good job of like curating the community. Um, so that when they would open the doors, there was already like this interesting conversation happening, and this diverse conversation. So I think they did a really awesome job of that. And I feel like, yeah, having a lot of like the crypto heavyweights has also kind of like having a lot of like the crypto heavyweights without like all this extra noise and bullshit you sometimes get on Twitter, um, is really good because I think for a lot of people it's kind of brought them back to like the OG roots of crypto, right? Like going on there, seeing like Vitalik posting about like what, why we're actually here, what we're actually doing. And there being conversations very much focused on the bigger goals rather than just, yeah.
Yeah. And also the OG roots of Twitter too. Like a lot of people who weren't there in the early days of Twitter and what might not know that it was like a super weird, interesting community of builders and like developers who were tinkering. And when Jack was in charge, he early on he let people do whatever they wanted with the APIs, and then they progressively just like shut all that down and shot themselves in the foot. But a lot of people have mentioned that to me, that they feel that early energy of Twitter on Farcaster because those protocols are open and you really can build whatever you want and take your social graph and port it across, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, seeing things like frames emerge and then seeing like the explosion of development around that, was just awesome. I remember like I spoke to Jesse from Base, yeah, a little while back, and I was like, we're discussing around like core metrics for new applications, and core metrics for like Base and Mode, and what he was like focused on and how we could like, yeah, kind of think through like what Mode could focus on as well. And he said like even at Coinbase, one of like Dan's core things was focusing on like active like developers, like net new active developers, um, that join the platform. And that was also like a big focus of Farcaster because devs can like find utility in everything, right? They'll hack things together, play around, and even if there's no obvious utility there, they'll build things, create it.
Yeah. They'll
Um,
make it janky if they have
yeah,
to. Well, you're seeing Frames is a good example. Frames is a good example of that because when Frames first came out, on-chain transactions weren't possible, at least for the first month and a half. But despite that being the case, all sorts of devs figured out interesting ways around it. Like I remember one dev, Winter, who's the one behind Base Paint, if you know Base Paint, he made a frame where you could mint using degen tips. So it was like I remember messaging him and I was like, how are you doing this? Like, how are you tracking the degen tips? And he's like, oh, I'm not. I'm just like taking a gamble that this is going to work out. So he just like, got people to tip, and then that would enable you to mint with the frame. So you're essentially paying for it in degen. And now looking at the price of degen, that was probably a pretty brilliant move. But to your point about how devs will figure out ways to, make things work no matter what.
Absolutely. And yeah, and you need you really need hundreds of devs, like really like tinkering with things. And then one will make a breakthrough, share it, and then opens the door for everyone to come in. So it was awesome seeing that happen in real time on Farcaster.
That's a testament to open source software as well, and sort of that permissionless mentality, because what you just described isn't really possible in a closed wall garden where you can only afford 50 devs or fewer, 10 devs. But if you have thousands of devs tinkering just because they want to and because it's open source, then you raise the chances much higher that you'll actually get that breakthrough.
Yeah. And also, the feedback loop is awesome, right? Like you build something cool on Farcaster, you have like hundreds of people telling you that's awesome. You have people like,
or not.
Vitalik. Yeah, or not. I'll be like, this sucks. But I mean, it's really like a cool new like town square for crypto.
Agreed. Does Mode have any sort of plans to do any development with Farcaster? Any alpha you can share?
We have a channel. It's not so active, but we're trying to like put more resources into building that stuff on Farcaster. So yeah, we'll let you know. But yeah, right now we're really just trying to focus on the DeFi opportunity, and from here, we hope that we can bring a lot of value to everyone in the Superchain with these new opportunities that are emerging. Yeah, I think like the focus of like every app building on Mode, and like people who early on wanted to build on Mode, we were pretty clear that like you're building on Mode, but like you're also building for like the Superchain, you're building for Ethereum, right? Like we expect you to grow from here to be on base and be able like be accessible on Optimism, OP mainnet. That's very much like the goal. And our goal is that we will support them as much as possible. We'll incentivize this growth, and we want them to like flourish and grow across the Superchain and be like the number one application on the Superchain for what they're building.
I love that. A lot of people, a lot of protocols might be afraid to do that because you're worried that if you promote people to try other chains and whatnot, that maybe they leave Mode. But I've always admired that, open mentality where I think people do always have a soft place for wherever they started to build. Is that sort of where you're coming from with that philosophy, or to take me a little bit behind your thinking in that?
Yeah, I mean, like we're like supported by Optimism. And like our remit is to build new awesome stuff that can be used across, all the OP stack chains. And we also think like the Superchain, like my idea of the Superchain is that it's going to be like the leading ecosystem. And we don't want to limit any builders, right? If they're building for Mode, they're building for Superchain. And like we feel that like there's always value that's going to come back to Mode users. If a protocol is super successful when it scales. So it's gonna be fun to see how projects grow. But I've been really impressed with Ionic. Their team is awesome. They're like really experienced builders. I've been really impressed with Ironclad. That's a new lending protocol. Another really experienced team. Then the DEXs, there's SupSwap, which is pretty cool. Kim, which is a cool exchange as well. And I mean, we want like, more native applications to come build on Mode, and our offer to them is that we'll help them like get through this bootstrap stage, which is why we've created like these ecosystem pages, these resources. Will help them get their initial, either users or liquidity to help them grow and scale. And they all get access to the different incentive programs Mode runs. They also get access to potentially have retro funding from Optimism as well, because they'll be building for the Superchain. So that's also super cool.
Yeah, I think what you're doing with Easy ETH is really interesting as well, because to date, L2s really haven't had that option to, both stake your ETH and then also use it in other DeFi protocols. And obviously, Lido has benefited from that greatly on the mainnet. And there's lots of reasons why we want, Lido to succeed, but maybe not succeed to the extent that it has been, which we won't get into in this conversation. But, obviously it's good for Ethereum to have people staking in different places. So I think that's pretty bullish, is that people can land on the L2, stake on Renzo, and then take that Easy ETH and go and play around with it in different places and make DeFi strategies, like you said.
Yeah, exactly.
So you heard it here first. Easy ETH is the new Lido. Is that right? Is the new STETH.
I mean, if it keeps growing the way it's growing, then yeah, it's gonna do something crazy. I mean, yeah, I think that Renzo has around 2 billion. Restaked by Renzo, and it's growing significantly every day. The team there are all like really smart and really focused on continuing to grow the asset. So I think it's going to continue to be a really interesting project to follow.
Well, the way I found out about Renzo was literally sort of Googling, is there a way to stake on L2? And I'm sure I won't be the first or the last person to Google that, so it's smart that they're the first team to do it. I'm surprised that they are. I'm surprised that no other teams are working on that, given, how much L2s have been growing. But
yeah, I mean, it is a fairly complex thing to do, with bridging, making sure there's liquidity on the bridge. So yeah, they really managed to nail it. And also ensuring that the asset itself exists on the L2 is something that they had to consider, and they worked with Connext on this. But yeah, just how Connext is the bridge. So you can have wrap stake ETH on an L2 and use it. But yeah, it's not really the same as having staked ETH on the L1, whereas with Easy ETH, it is the same.
Yeah, someone's going and doing it for you on the mainnet, basically. Yeah. One question I wanted to ask before we wrap things up is, when you were planning to build Mode, you had the idea, and I'm sure you were looking at many different networks and options for L2s. I always like to ask people, why did you choose to build on the Superchain? And I'm sure you've touched on some of it already, but what were the main reasons why you thought, Mode should be a part of the Superchain versus its own L1, or maybe built on Arbitrum Nova or on ZK Sync, or many of the other options available to builders?
Yeah, see, I think so I spoke with the Optimism team just over a year ago, when Base had kind of announced that they were going to launch, or Coinbase announced they're going to launch Base. And, I was asking them about, why isn't Optimism, investing more heavily in DeFi, right? Like at that point, Arbitrum was really pushing DeFi, and, they were doing they still are, and they were doing an incredible job. I was like, Optimism can do this. They had some of the biggest DeFi apps came straight to Optimism from day one. Like Synthetics was deployed, I think, within like a week on Optimism being live.
Yeah, and Velo and Arrow have grown like crazy as well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And, their response was like, Optimism we're focused on like this bigger vision of growing the super chain, and Base is one of these chains, and there's going to be multiple chains. And my question was, okay, well, who's building the DeFi chain? And they're like, well, it's pretty much open right now. So
open season.
if you can, get a team together and essentially start building out a DeFi ecosystem that has new applications, that has new developers, then there's definitely, grants and various funding mechanisms available for you to scale that out. So we ran a hackathon with them. It went really well. We launched testnet, ran a hackathon, started to look into different mechanisms. One of the first was like sequence fee sharing. And we built out, some basic contracts for that, deployed them, ran the first hackathon with the testnet in August. Really just kept building and kept like building that relationship with Optimism. And we really enjoyed working with them. Their team were super supportive. We also like got access to, to chat with the base team and chat with all these different teams building. It was really cool. I've always kind of focused very much in on the Ethereum ecosystem. And I feel like Optimism is, it's very similar. I mean, it's extremely similar in a lot of ways. So it's really enjoyable, being surrounded by these kind of people who are building, just want to build really cool stuff and scale the space.
I love that. A little bit about our listenership for the podcast. Obviously, we're originally funded and came out of the Nouns project. I don't know if you are familiar with Nouns DAO, but obviously a very builder-focused and grants-focused body. Lots of builders, lots of devs, lots of creatives who are in Nouns. We're also very Farcaster forward. We've been minting all of these podcasts for over a year on Zora, and we started releasing them first on Farcaster. So a lot of people listen in on chain to this podcast. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to speak to those people as they're listening to this. And if you're starting with end users, if they're end users, what's the best place for them to go to check out Mode and start tinkering and playing around?
Yeah, absolutely. So check out the docs.mode.network. If anyone's interested in launching an L3, then we have a project, a hackathon with Celestia. If anyone's interested in launching a project on Mode, then we have a dev drop. There's different categories, mostly DeFi focused, but it's pretty open. If anyone wants to like just generally like chat, jam on some ideas to kind of scale the Superchain, then my DMs are always open. My Twitter is J, just letter J, Ross Treacher, which is my name. You'll be able to find it if you type in James Ross, probably. Yeah.
Sounds good. And you're on Farcaster as well? Do you know your handle off?
Yeah, my Farcaster is just James Ross. I snagged
James
a good
Ross.
one.
Okay. Oh,
yeah, so that's easy.
Yeah, perks of being early. Perks of being early. You get to choose your name. Amazing. Well, I'll finish off with a final question, which is just, what are you most excited about for, I usually say 2024, but that feels long in crypto. Let's say 6 months. Next 6 months, what are you most excited about from Mode?
Yeah, so Optimism shipping fraud proofs is huge because, that's a really cool piece of the puzzle when it comes to decentralizing L2s. And
that's like leveraging ZK tech essentially alongside optimistic rollup?
Exactly. And it will enable, it's essentially like the largest security upgrade to the network, which is great. We just had the Degen upgrade, which has significantly reduced fees. Now we're going to get a significant security upgrade, so that's awesome.
I've been amazed, by the way, at how quickly they've been able to incorporate ZK. I feel like it was just a few months ago that they were like, oh, and by the way, we're paying teams to research this. And that was always the top criticism of the Superchain is, of course, oh, you don't have fraud proofs, don't talk to me. And here we are. So
here we are, exactly. It's on testnet, on Spolia. So super bullish. And then I think the key thing for Mode is, scaling up the ecosystem, like really excited for new DeFi protocols to launch. We have like more yield bearing assets coming. A load more protocols launching. I think a big launch we're super excited about is Velodrome launching on Mode.
I was going to ask you about when a drone was going to be coming to Mode, and you just answered.
Yeah. So we're super excited for that. We really, really like their team and have built up a good relationship with them and have some awesome strategies which we're going to work on together. So this is going to be like, I think, the first kind of real taste of like what Superchain DeFi can be. And I think that's going to be really powerful for like everyone in the ecosystem to see. So yeah, we're really excited for that.
Yeah. So hopefully a year from now, people won't be able to say that, OP is just the culture chain. It can be more than that.
Exactly.
It can be
Exactly.
both.
We have everything chain for sure.
Love it. Well, James, really appreciate that you could join me today. It was an awesome chat. Didn't even feel like a podcast. It just felt like a good conversation with another Ethereum fan. So appreciate you. And thank you for joining us today.
Yeah. Thanks so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Awesome. We'll see you on
Take
chain.
care. Bye.